why would you even want to do this to your son? To do that and then to put that pressure on your child to keep the family and I don't think it's working out. And I haven't seen, if there were a ton of examples of like, no, dude, that's how we do it. It's awesome. Okay, cool. I'm not seeing that. What's up, family? Welcome to another episode of the Radical Middle Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Nixon, with my co-host, Freddie Romero. And as always, we're jumping into the conversations, the tension, the things that you wish your church talked about. So let's talk about it. We're going to talk about family business today. That's right. And here's the word of the day, friends, children: nepotism. Yeah, that's right. Where you give power away and position and privilege to your family members. Yeah. So I want to talk about what's the most... well, let me just ask a question. Do you feel... Because I have a strong feeling about this, dude. But do you feel like it's wrong for a pastor to have started a church, planted it, grow it, and then just pass it off to almost exclusively to their son?
Do I feel it's wrong? Oh, man. Brushstroke, yes.
Brushstroke.
But obviously it depends. But it's very rare when it's done well with integrity and that the son, not the child, but the son actually like earned that, on his own merit. He was the best candidate or the best person. But 99% of the time, for sure, it's nepotism. Reeks of nepotism, looks like nepotism, and somehow the church accepts it.
Yeah.
Like, no one frowns. No one, oh yeah, that makes sense. The dad started it, he founded it, he grew it. Yeah, let's continue with the son because the dad's older, he's going to retire, whatever. And no one like bats an eye. No one says, I'll give you a weird one that I just personally know. My father-in-law is like ex-church, the one he used to go to. The pastor passed away, and his wife, his widow, who had never shepherded alongside, they weren't like co-leading. Like after like months of figuring out who was going to be the next, because all his sons were, backslid. They weren't in the church. His adult sons. She ended up taking over. Like and one of the questions that a few asked were, she I don't think she had ever preached a sermon or stuff like that, and she'd been by his side for so many decades. And but for the majority of the churches, they just accepted it. It's like, oh yeah, that's her husband.
Yeah. How old were they?
I mean, I think she is in her I think she's like 68 or like early 70s.
Yeah.
So think about that.
That's a whole nother episode. But
think about that.
Oh, we did one.
Yeah.
About get out the way.
Yeah,
man. So
yeah, he died.
Yeah.
Of old age.
From old age.
Yes.
Ah, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Here's how I feel about this, man. One, I think it's a really weird thing because it sets it up as the church as a business. I totally understand, completely understand. I start a business, I grow a business, I invite my children into that business. I die, or they sell the business, or I give the business to my children, and they continue that business, right? I mean, that kind of makes sense to me in the business world. But the church isn't a business. Well,
depends who you ask.
Yeah, right. I mean, we did one on that too, didn't we?
Yes, we have some legal documents
floating
around.
Dude, like, it's not a business, and I wonder where this idea comes from, where it's like you set up these like mini monarchies, to these mini empires, if you will, as the church, and you grow it, and maybe you're really successful, but there's so many like pitfalls to this. One, a lot of times, like if it's a big church, right, you kind of set up your child to fail, right? And now I do see like what is it, like Andy Stanley's dad who just passed away, right?
Yes, Charles
he
Stanley.
took over for his dad, right?
No.
At Northport? No.
Nope. No.
He started another church.
Yes.
Okay.
So the example there of, I lived in Atlanta for 2 years, and these two were in the top 10 of biggest ministries in Georgia. And Andy left his dad's church because his dad, the name of his Atlanta Baptist Church, never changed. Looks the same. Globe in the background, choir in the background. and Andy Stanley went ahead and started North Point.
Oh, okay.
Because the youth group, his dad gave him an opportunity to grow as a youth leader. And he grew so well that they started a second location with the youth group in mind. But because there was tension between the elder and the board, with Andy not adopting the look and the style and stuff like that, his dad and him just had a conversation about, hey, you know what? You just need to go do your own thing. And
I mean, so that's, I mean, even I was wrong in that example, but even in that, it's that's some of the pressure too, where it's like you're supposed to just carry on the legacy of your father and status quo, and then everybody expects you to be this him
replica.
Dude, that's so difficult to step into, because as someone who's done transitions in different spaces, it's hard to do that.
Oh, like when people expect you to do what the founder did?
Yeah, with Pastor Daddy, who's actually your daddy, right? That would be so difficult, right?
That's
it's like
tough.
So that's one. But then two, when they treat it like a family business, like by and large, we're not like just open and transparent with our family business. Like my family stuff. Like, you don't know all the stuff that goes on in my family. There's nothing nefarious, but like there's private things. Like, you don't know all of our finances. You don't know what all the stuff my kids are dealing with, or me and my wife are going through in our like. There's some stuff that's just for the family, and that's fine. But then you put it into an institution of the church, and now it's like, oh, well, like, how are they using the funds? Don't worry about it. I'm the pastor. It's a family deal. You know what I mean? Stuff gets weird. We've seen this over the past couple months or past couple years, where there's an indiscretion with a pastor's child. And they don't, and maybe they're not at fault, but they try to cover it up because it just changes. That's your son, or that's your daughter.
Yeah.
And
your protocol for your son is so much different than if another ministry leader at your church did the same infraction or was accused of the same thing.
Right. And so you see all that kind of stuff happen. So yeah, I just feel like it's maybe it's not like ungodly, but it's not practical, and it's not wise, I don't think. Now, here's my one caveat. If someone starts a church, they grow it, and then they're going to retire, and they need to look for their successor. If the son or the daughter or whoever, the child was like, I would like to apply for that, and there was a process that was outside of the pastor making the decision, right, to the elder board or the board, like the other people, and that's the one they chose, dude, great. That's the only play where I go, oh, that makes sense to me. Because it was like, well, they were, you know what I mean? And it's really clear, like, hey, pastor didn't have when it came to his son, you know what I mean? He didn't have a, what I'm saying? Like a vote in it. Like, there's ways that you can structure things like that just bring so there's no questions.
Yeah, you want integrity in the process.
Absolutely,
you want to make sure
man.
And honestly, too, for those that do have their families working alongside of them, you actually, it's to a benefit that your family goes through a process to be elected or, given the position of leadership. You do a disservice to them in today's age, when we know clearly, we're not blind anymore, and Gen Zers are seeing these power structures and and people are trying to deconstruct. You're doing your son, your daughter, your family member a disservice by just promoting them as the lead leader, the lead pastor in today's age, because people can see right through that. People can see, hey, there was no due diligence, there was no practice here. What's going on? Well, what about, for example, there's few success stories, but for example, whether he's your cup of tea or not, Mr. Nixon.
Go ahead.
Joel Osteen's dad
not my cup of tea, dude. Will Cumby, who's on our staff, we were just in New York or somewhere together, and he's like, oh man, I was watching Joel. I said, I don't want to hear it, dude.
Oh man.
I seriously, I am not a fan, bro.
Hey, Joel.
He's like, hey, hire me.
Bro, I'm your friend.
Dude, bro.
But for example, in their story, his father had a significant influential ministry.
Yeah.
That kind of doesn't mirror the way Joel leads his ministry. But you see the metrics, you see that it's one of the few where you go, okay, and his father passed away, I think, right? And so like then Joel, like the family, I'm not sure how the process was where he's like the youngest, but he was the one that became lead pastor. But it's like he took that ministry, what you would say, to like, another sphere, not another level, like another sphere of growth. What about in those instances, man? Like, you like there was no succession plan. There was no
right.
Like, who's at fault? So it's like the son who knows the intricacies of the ministry and the workings in the system and has credibility because he's been working in this ministry for such a long time, is scandal free, etc. Up until that point, right? Getting
Sure,
leadership,
yeah.
Like, is it unfair to say, hey, man, you shouldn't take over because you're his son?
Yeah, I mean, just like everything in this radical middle space of this area of tension, it's like, sure, like, I'm not trying to make a rule out of it. I'm just saying, like, I think it's by and large unwise, impractical, and I don't think it's a good practice. Can it happen and be okay? Yeah, I don't know about it in that instance if I would call that okay. Just because I have theological issues with Joel Osteen, but I mean, it's the same way that I wouldn't want someone to impose like it has to be my son. The same way I wouldn't want to always impose that it can never be your son or your daughter or like, I'm sure there's. I don't know. Is there good examples of that? That's one. As far as like a successful, like, oh, he took it and grew it. I don't know, man. I haven't heard of a ton that have worked out. I've always heard like maybe it works out but then I hear the backstory and it's usually horrendous.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, yeah, they really went through it and there was a family fallout and there was, estrangement and there was like just a lot of stuff. And then I've also seen the one where it's like, the successor couldn't handle the pressure or the parent was still around. And so anybody that I've talked to behind the scenes of that stuff, they're like, oh man, it's been really hard.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I just don't think it's a good practice.
Yeah.
But again, what bothers me about it is it just reeks of like business.
Oh, for sure. And I also want to give, as someone whose dad was a pastor.
I was going to bring it up, bro, but.
What were you going to bring up?
I was going to be like, how come you didn't take over?
Yeah.
Pouring lemon.
To be honest, man, in honoring to my dad, there really wasn't much to take over, to be frank. Different paradigm. And he wanted me to leave.
So he did. So he was like, no, you should go and.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's healthy.
And I said, no, I'm helping you teach every week. Like, let me, like, I see you're tired. Let me help you. And I was now married. And so I was like, look, Mara can do kids ministry. We didn't like, she can do worship. And he was telling us to go because it's like, you guys can write a new chapter. And I think he kind of maybe foresaw the fact that
it was going to end.
Yeah, it was going to end. And, because if he'd end it, then yeah, for sure. Like, I'm not going to the same church you're going to if you're not leading it. Because I wanted to help him. I was being faithful to him, and I think that was my sin. My sin is that I was called to my dad as opposed to being called to God. And so I felt like leaving that church was a sin against my dad, and what I was infringing on was what God was calling me to. So that's a huge one. And so I want to free some of these PKs out there.
Yep. Talk to them.
You brought up the fact like the successful. There's in South Central, there is a church that was very influential, and the dad really blew up this ministry. If you are African American or part of the Black community, this is probably where your grandparents went. They listened to successful. His son ended up taking over the church, and it hasn't reached those levels. Like, he doesn't attract the same crowds, doesn't preach, I like some people would say, as good as his dad.
Yeah.
Because they always are comparing him to the one. And so for a lot of you PKs, where you think that, oh man, I'm going to start on third base. This is good for me. This is what my dad worked for. To be honest, like, you're doing yourself a disservice as well, because people know that you got the position because of your last name. You got the position because you're a firstborn or you're a PK. And you're doing so there, you already are wrestling against that. And you're also wrestling against the shadow of who your dad was. And so if it was a successful, healthy ministry, now you're competing against that. Everything that you do is in comparison to that. One of the most generous churches here in Los Angeles, or that's been a staple of generosity in Los Angeles, is the Dream Center, Angelus Temple with Matthew, and he talks about when he came to church plant here, his dad, Tommy Barnett, right? I think his name is Tommy Barnett. Yes, Tommy Barnett in Arizona has a successful ministry, big church. And when he came out here to plant, he says that he would feel so depressed when he would call his dad and he would say, hey dad, how was service today? And instead of be like, oh man, it was kind of like one of our lowest services. Like only like 200 people gave their lives to Christ today. Anyway, how was your service, son? And he had but 8 people in total, and like 3 of them were his friends. And so it's like that pressure, but it was good for Matthew to kind of like go away and do his own thing. And I think that Abraham call, that call that God made to Abraham, I think for a lot of PKs, that's the call that God is making to us today. Leave your father's tent and go to a land that I will show you. I think that's a trusting process. Yeah. Because sometimes we have to leave the unknown to be able to succeed on our own, because there is no how can we trust God, man? Like, this is the beautiful thing, that when, to get biblical again, when the Israelites go to the promised land, Joshua's like, hey, let's pick up some stones. Less when we are there and our kids are grown and they assume that this is how it's always been. Yeah. We've always lived lavishly. We've always been okay. Like, no, you need to remind them of where we came from. That reminder is very essential. That struggle forms you very well. And for a lot of PKs that end up taking over their dad's successful ministries, man, that's why they falter. That's why they become depressed soon. So that, like, if you notice, a lot of these young guys, they are having scandals. They are coming up with abuse. They're falling into moral sins. It's horrible. And even, for example, the pastor daddies that have successful ministries that are like, hey, you're my favorite spiritual son. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm not gonna leave yet, but I also don't want you to like wait here forever, so that you don't leave me and we keep the expansion business going. I'm gonna go ahead and start a campus in Los Angeles. I'm gonna go ahead and start a campus in New York, and I'm gonna put my favorite spiritual son there, and it's gonna blow up because it has my brand name, my church's brand name on it. So I'm gonna plant you there.
What church are you talking about?
I mean,
I'm just kidding.
I can give you a list. I'm sure there's a few documentaries out there that might expose or shed some light on some of these. Yeah. And so what you do is you're elevating these spiritual sons to third base when they don't even know how to swing a bat yet, and when they don't even know how to like play the field. Like they just don't have any real life experience, and you're setting all these spiritual sons for success. I would be very, very weary to say, hey, I'm not going to take over the church until my dad has it perfect. Or, there's a lot. I feel like I'm rambling now because there's all these examples that are coming to mind, Tommy, and I'm sure that you can read through the lines.
Well, no, I mean, I would say, I really do. Even the more we even talk about it today, I go, I think it's a bad idea. But if I think about it biblically, okay, there is this piece of like, where people get sent out. There's a beautiful part of being poured into and then being sent out. You're sent out, right? So the disciples poured into, they're sent out, and he tests them out, right? Sends them out, and then he leaves, gives them the Holy Spirit, and then they go out, right? So there is a biblical principle there. When you look at the biblical principle, or a principle found in the Bible, of giving power to your son or your daughter, but mostly your son. That's found in Kings, and that's found in the Old Testament, where before that, God actually told the Israelites, do not have a king. And they're like, we want a king. And there's like, you don't want a king. And the prophet was like, he's going to lord it over you. He's going to treat you like kings treat people. So when we set up many kingdoms and empires, right, or businesses, we're the king. How did that work out for everybody? Like when you read through Kings and Chronicles, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Right? It's terrible. And you think of, David and Absalom, you know what I mean? You think like just like and I think God was trying to save us from something. No, I haven't studied it enough. I wouldn't go as far as be like, it's a biblical principle for you to never hand over a ministry or a church to your child. I would hedge on that a little bit, but definitely like a biblical principle to like, no, we send out. And so, because why would you even want to do this to your son? Look at the ministry I've done. Look at, and I'm thinking mostly in like really large churches, but to do that and then to put that pressure on your child to keep the family legs to go. There's just something intrinsically difficult about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's working out. And I haven't seen, if there were a ton of examples of like, no, dude, that's how we do it. It's awesome. Okay, cool. I'm not seeing that.
There aren't a lot of examples of that. And like, even the ones that we're talking about, those are like, those are the exceptions, man. Those are the exceptions. But the reality is like, even when we do the whole like this family business of like, hey, I'm going to set you up.
Yeah.
And you're going to start on my 30 years of ministry. We are doing a disservice. You see it in Chronicles where like one generation has their hearts inclined to the Lord. And then in the very next chapter, the son says that their heart was very far away from the Lord and they would create idols. And it's this like Socratic, saying that, like good times create weak men.
Yeah.
Whereas hard times create strong leaders. And so it's like when you have it good.
Did Socrates say that?
I don't know if that was Socrates, bro. I think it's one of the Stoics sayings, And so it's just interesting to see that play out, not only biblically, but also like you see, like even in corporate, you see when like the CEO gives a thing to the son who grew up in, the land of flowing milk and honey, how quickly the drug abuse comes out and the scandals come out and the affairs and the divorce, and it ends up tearing up the company apart. And there's very few companies that have been able to do it well. In fact, I did some research on what the best American companies, and I'm sure there's several, but they're also not without scandal, like Walmart, Ford. They're not without turmoil, Comcast. The only one that we've seen with scandal-free is Chick-fil-A, where like the Cathys are handing it over and over, and it's very still much a family business. But here's the key word: they're not a ministry first.
Yeah, they're a business. They sell chicken.
They're a business.
Yeah,
and so it makes sense that they would have these biblical principles that kind of like infuse. So, but they are the exception.
Maybe Amway. Maybe I think is another one.
Oh no.
Yeah. The DeVos family. I think so.
They're like generation.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I didn't know.
I don't know who runs it all.
I don't know. Let us know if you know. But but in churches and ministries, you don't see it. You don't even see it in Latin America. And in Latin America, you're starting to see a lot of big ministries now in several parts. And you Latinos that have parents in South America and Central America know who I'm talking about. And they are priming and grooming the congregations for the sons to take over. And the people are like, no, the son ain't you.
Right. I mean, I don't know who wins in that situation. Like, who? I don't know who like wins from that.
It's tough because the staff sees it. Leadership. Sometimes there is someone that has worked and been faithful to that ministry and put in several years. And while this son was being a prodigal and this and the other, and he finally comes home. Like it's not that he's accepted home. It's like, okay, not only is he home, but now he's going to lord over you.
Right.
And it's like, as humans, you look at that and you're like, wait, hold on a second. I've been here, and you're like, I am qualified. I am studied. I love this church. I love this ministry. And you're just going to go ahead and bypass, not even give me an opportunity to enter the conversation to maybe lead. and I love this place. And it's not that I'm trying to take it over from you, you know, and I have no stories like that. I remember you were telling me a story how even for some staff, they noticed how the healthcare that was applied to them was completely different than the healthcare that the pastoral family had.
Oh, dude.
And the pastoral family and the pastor's sons, their healthcare was completely different and better than the healthcare of the rest of the staff.
Dude, so, okay, I got to tell you the story because it's crazy. This church is close to the Mexican border, okay, which could be several different states. So, but close to the Mexican border, so they're on this side in the United States church. And I remember seeing this youth worker, and on the Instagram, I'm like, hey, they took a picture of the clinic they were going to, and I go, dude, everything okay? Oh man, my wife's not feeling good. I had to bring her down to the clinic.
Hold on, to the clinic in Mexico?
In Mexico. So I go, hey, you don't have insurance, because you could pay just straight out of pocket, And he's like, oh no, we have insurance. But we have Mexican insurance. I'm like, cool. So I investigate a little bit more. I call him and I'm like, okay, explain to me why you have to go down to Mexico.
The church is in the U.S.
Yeah. And he goes, oh, well, because the insurance the church gives us, and he's a full-time youth pastor, and he preaches at the church, and he does all this stuff. The insurance they give us is the Mexican insurance. And I'm like, oh, so does the pastor have Mexican insurance too? He's like, no, him and his son who does the worship, they have just insurance here in the United States. And I was like, what? I was so upset because I go, hey, what? Why is that? You need to go talk to your pastor about that. He said, I talked to him about it. And the pastor's like, oh, well, it's because you have the language, you speak the language, which is what's crazy is his wife, Latina, but doesn't really speak Spanish. And I'm going, dude, these are medical terms. They're hard to understand in English. And if you're bilingual and you're trying to, right, so you can be fluent in Spanish but not understand. You go and they're telling you about your appendix, or here's how your blood flows, or here's the name of you're going to be like, I think I got, and he goes, yeah, he speaks Spanish fluently, but he's like, yeah, I had to look it up, right? They have to translate it. And not only that, then to go down there and to come back across the border takes hours, bro. Sitting in traffic, so every time you need to go to the doctor, that's what you need to do. And I go, dude, how ugly is that? That you and your son, who's this part-time worship leader or whatever, the church provides all the cost for that. And then this is where it gets a little racist in my understanding. But for your Latino, the other staff who's Latino, they all have to go down to Mexico. And I'm like, I don't even know if that's legal. But it's that kind of nepotism that I just go,
wow.
And here's the New Testament. A lot of the New Testament talks about that kind of favoritism. It talks about order of worship. It talks about how men and women and families should behave, how older people should behave with younger people, and how people should behave with those who are in slavery. How it's reorganizing all that into a kingdom economy.
Right.
So when I see stuff like that, I'm just like, that is gross. It's so ugly and non-Christ-like. And I'm sure that pastor's just like, well, it's just good business or whatever. And I'm like, dude, that sucks. This guy's not hardly getting paid anything anyway. And then you force him down there and he's supposed to thank you. By the way, it was another one of the situations of that kind of pastor daddy kind of thing where I'm your spiritual father and and I'm like, but see, that's the breakdown of that whole thing. Oh, you're my spiritual father. Okay. But you don't help me understand how you treat who you treat and how you treat. So anyway, man. Yeah.
I had a friend that left the church and being a part of this team for several years, I think it was over 5, 6, 7 years, came to find out in the weirdest way that like the pastor's kids were on the payroll.
Yeah.
And they were like teenagers, and they were never like at staff. There's like never a role for them. They were just on the payroll. And the way it came out too was just very weird. Just like they kind of like were happy about it, and so just like think about what that.
Wait, who was happy about it?
The kids.
Oh, I'd be happy too. Get paid for doing nothing.
For doing nothing.
Yeah. Dude.
And but that's not an isolated incident.
Yeah.
We've read stories and seen like stories over and over and over about that, man. You just have to follow people like Nick Hoke on Twitter. I mean, he's always asking for these types of stories, and people will offer them up. Yeah. Like I had a pastor that, for, staff recognition day, gave the son a car. Like who's paying for that? Like for all his hard work. And it's just like staff is seeing that, and they're like,
and does anybody else get a car?
No, it wasn't an Oprah thing, like it was. And so like but I'm gonna see these are tweets, right? They're like, you just don't get, but bro, like if those are the headlines,
I mean,
and that's public, like a staff recognition day.
Yeah.
And you're handing out several things. Like, hey, we're going to give Tommy a 2-night stay at, San Diego by the water because, for him and his wife. But we're going to give my son a brand new car. It's like the discrepancy, the levels of like, oh, I'm not as appreciated.
So why do people think this is okay?
I think it's because we don't understand. We don't understand how it should be. You don't know what you don't know. So when we give pastors and leaders unchecked power,
yeah,
then their word is gospel, and they're the lead pastor. Man, I have mad respect for pastors that don't lead that way, that don't pull rank. They lead out of influence, out of relationship equity. There's no discrepancy. I see it and I love it, and I've been part of ministries where maybe it's sons or daughters, working together, and I've been around, or even spouses that work together. And I love that even in spaces of staff, there's no like them teaming up against, like there's debate and it's welcome. Like, even the spouses are giving each other pushback just like they would, because it's like, hey, we're here. We are colleagues. We are team members. But I've also heard the opposite, where other spaces are like, all right, team, like, we're going to discuss and we're going to give the floor to my son, who's going to tell us what we're going to do this year. Dude,
yeah. And yeah. That's just poor leadership. It's horrible leadership. We had a leader that shared, they were the youth pastor of this church, and the pastor brought in his brother on staff who had been accused of molesting like underage girls. Like it's like a predator. And he brings them on staff to the church.
But he would not have hired someone else with that.
Well, dude,
reputation.
That just seems crazy to me. I just go, I don't care who they are. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, no, dude. Like, so I don't understand, though, how you and I can sit here and just go, yeah, dude, that's crazy. But how many of you guys are watching this going, oh, my gosh, that's the church I'm in?
Yeah.
And so what do you do about that?
Like, well, I mean, first of all, you need to be aware of it. Like, I think you need to be aware and
that's not normal.
It isn't
like,
normal.
Well, when you say normal, that's not healthy. Let's say that.
Yeah, Tommy.
It shouldn't be normal.
It isn't.
It's not healthy.
I know I gave an example of different things, but there is this mega ministry that's from down under. And years ago, when they decided to church plant in Los Angeles,
Mountain Music,
they planted the son who, and I just kept thinking, like, man, like as big of a ministry as that is, and you guys have a college and university, there wasn't anyone else more qualified to be part of pioneer the expansion program into North America than your son. And we prayed for them, we love them, etc. But the son's no longer leading that plant, and that's very uncommon. Like it's very few instances, where that happens. And it's like, man, you set him up with finances, with money, with brand name, and he couldn't handle it. And so like they're again, like, but we accept it as like, oh, that makes sense. Like nobody said, hey, what are his qualifications? Like he's not even American. Like, I mean, it's not even like, like he's white, but it's like, hey, he's not even American. Like, and we're just going to go ahead and like skip due process and not like, there are American young guys here in the United States and women who are qualified, went to school, etc., that could have said, hey, I know the context and culture of Los Angeles.
Wow.
Let me get the resources. Let me get the funding. Let me get the brand name and see how I can contextualize with my ideas, not under your brand and just franchise out another church. Like it's a business, right? We're going to mold. Like if I plant in Phoenix, if I plant in New York, if I plant in Miami, I'm going to make sure it looks identical to what I built in another country. Like, come on, man. And it's like we're setting people up for failure. And so I'm telling you, like, young people, like, I want to, man, I could now having lived through that experience, I wonder if my dad's church was a 200 member church. Because if you got a 200 member church, you made it. Like you're crushing it. So like, don't be fooled. The mega churches are like a small percentage of churches in America.
Average church is 50, I think.
50 people. Yeah, something like that, right? 50 people. And so if you have a church of 50 people, you're crushing it too. Trust me, you're crushing it too. Mm-hmm. Like there is no, be faithful to those 50. But I wonder, living in Southern California, if my dad had a church of 200 people, a Spanish church of 200 people, would I have been enticed to stay?
Dude, when you said that, I was wondering about that. I'm like, if the church, if he saw a different trajectory, I mean, I wonder.
I wonder too. I wonder too, because he gave me all the opportunities. And honestly, I got a lot of opportunities because of the lack of people. So it was out of necessity. Hey,
guess what, son? You get to be the janitor and the youth pastor and the deacon.
I was all those things. All those things. Help with
and play the drums.
I played guitar.
Yep.
My brothers played bass and drums.
Yep.
My wife became the worship leader. It was out of necessity. But I wonder if our church was at 200, 300 people, because my love for the church never wavered, whether it was 50 people, 100 people. We suffered several church splits. But I just wonder for myself, because there was no one around my context at that time to say, hey, you know what? Like, God has called you to this, but not here. Like, no one. And I think it was assumed that because I was my dad's right-hand man, that would inevitably happen. And so I do wonder if the trajectory was different. My dad might have enticed me to stay, kept me. Maybe I would have wanted to stay. But I think that might. So maybe it's easy for me to say, some of you guys are under your dads right now, under your dads and spiritual daddies. And you're looking and saying, and then you guys are already having that conversation of like, hey, when I retire, you're going to take over. I'm going to hand over the church to you. I would think about it really strongly, and then maybe hit us up to talk about healthy transitions. Yeah, hit up Urban Youth Workers. Ask for Tommy Nixon, and really have this conversation, because you don't want to do this to yourself. Trust me, being a shepherd and leading, there's a weight to this.
Yeah.
And you don't want the pressure of living under someone's shadow or ministry name and brand. I don't like. I'm wanting to give you a cautionary, ask you to have caution when it comes to these things, because the church is at stake, and the world is looking at us, and they're looking at the family business. They're looking at the expansion. They're looking at the money, sometimes that we're collecting from impoverished communities. And they look at the way we're living our lives, and then these little monarchies. And it is what happened in those times. The monarchies and their families lived in these beautiful castles.
Yeah.
Had everything catered to them, while the people had no running water, no resources.
Yeah.
Had to bathe in the dirty river. And they knew that the palace Like, and so those kids, they grew up in the palace, they didn't know the struggle of the people they were leading. And so when they would take over the throne, they led with such an iron fist because they always wanted more and more and more, and the people could not give more. There will be a revolution, and you're already starting to see the revolution with the construction talk and conversations.
1.2 million.
2 million
Yeah.
young people leaving the church every single year. This is a revolution. And every time they see nepotism and it smells like it looks like it feels like nepotism, it is a red flag. They're not stupid.
Yeah.
They see it, Tommy. And we have to make sure that we don't perpetuate this reputation that all it is family business.
Yeah, man. And I think the antidote to all this is extreme transparency. But that goes back to like leadership development. So my core leadership belief is I'm called to, as a leader, to help those around me become who they were created to be while in the vehicle of whatever God's given me to lead. So if it's a church and my son or kids are a part of the church, which I would hope so, then I'm actually going, okay, what does God have for you? Who is he created to be? And how are we going to help you get there? Now, if by some chance it's within the church or whatever, I'm going to have to trust the rest of the church to see that gifting in my son or daughter, and then they would have to place them. That's just good policy. You know what I mean? So that there is not, and then I'd let everybody know that, look, I didn't choose them. This is what they want to do and all that, right? And then there's a whole transition piece where here's the other major mistake I think people make is they say it's a transition, but then the founder or whoever started the church or the institution doesn't leave. Then it's not just the transition for the person coming in. It's a transition for the person going out.
Yeah.
And there has to be enough space for the person, whoever's coming in, to actually lead. And that is really hard to do when you have these dynamic, amazing leaders that you're taking over for. That's really hard.
Yeah.
So if they don't make a vacuum, it's really hard. And I would even say, and people, I'm not going to be popular here, I would say, no, they have to actually leave. Like, go somewhere else to church for a year or two, and then come back, or actually transition to something.
And if you see or hear that the new person that succeeded you is doing things differently, don't be hitting them up and calling them and saying, hey, you know what? That wasn't my intention when I started.
Yeah, don't shadow lead is the other part of it, right? Don't like, well, I'm just going to go talk to the board members and I'm going to get this straight. And look, do the hard work and due diligence beforehand. But when it's your own child, that blinds you to some things.
Right.
At least what I've seen. I've always tried. And because of this, I always try to be real realistic on my own kids. Like, no, they're not the greatest at everything in the world. I know who they are. Mm-hmm. We're honest about that. Mm-hmm. But I find for a lot of people, that's a hard space for them to be in.
That's a hard thing, man. Yeah, I know that. Maybe it's hard for some parents to stop being parents, even when it's
yeah. And that's the other thing, dude, is like, are you my boss now or are you my parent? And you have to be a really mature leader, and I think you can do this, but you have to have a really clear delineation between what role are you playing at what time. So you have to say things like, "Hey, I need to talk to you as your boss. Hey, I'm done with that. Can we have a conversation as a family?" But most people, I mean, if you can't even decipher that giving a car to your son on Staff Appreciation Day is a bad move, then you're not going to have the maturity or understanding to have those kind of conversations because you've convoluted everything. That's why it's okay for the church to pay for your vacations and all your kids' cell phones and for all your insurance at your house, and for like you're if it's a family business, then that's okay. Why? Shoot, I saw a pastor a number of years ago. It was like the church had bought him this mansion, and then he got called to court. And the court's like, why is this house in your name? Oh, well, we bought that for ministry purposes. You know what I'm saying? Like, It gets real.
Absolutely. You see it all the time. You see, Maybe it's
So don't do it.
not even, it's not like the sons and family being promoted, but they're getting the benefits that the church is paying for.
Yeah.
Like, hey, God is telling us to buy this new $60 million jet. And then when I'm not using it, my kids are using it for their personal travels.
So there's a level of integrity, friends, because the jet thing, we all have that example, right? But I don't know how many people are doing that. Probably more than we'd like to admit, right?
Yeah.
But on the other end of that is, whether your church is 12 people or 12,000 people, you can have integrity and be transparent in your dealings. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now I'll say this too. There are those pastors out there, I see you, that are so not like what we're describing, and their churches don't even take care of them. Right? So they're out there. So you guys are out there. You're working your butt off. You're doing all the things. And your church board pays you like
scraps,
tiny. And then ask you to pay for your, for you to do ministry. Like you got to also pay for that. Like you don't, like, come on, man. Like, so there is that part of like, dude, like care for your pastor and your staff and those kind of things. So there's both, I don't even know if they're extremes, but. And so the church kills me sometimes with its lack of wisdom, practicality, and leadership. And I'm like, I don't understand why things are like that. But we all get, because it's spiritual, we all get taken in. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, pastor says, well, I guess that'll be okay. I'm like, and it's the whole, like, the emperor's got no clothes thing. And that's what's happened politically in our country.
Yo.
Where I'm like, man, right? This is in a couple months, I think.
No, we're here.
Oh, no, we are here.
We're here.
Yeah.
We're here.
And so it's like,
look at it. Look at the news right now. Like it's
ridiculous. So anyway, man.
Yeah.
So what's funny is usually we have a tension. This feels like less of a tension and more like she shouldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
There does exist some tension for those of us that are PKs. Your kids technically qualify to be a part of our tribe. There's a special place for us in heaven.
Yeah.
That's not theologically correct, but we'd like to believe that. So there is this tension there. Look, we start the conversation at the radical middle. We want you to continue it. We want to hear from you. We want you to dialogue these things. And look, because this is such a sensitive subject, I, as a churchgoer and as a leader now and as a PK, I want to let you know that it's important who you have this conversation with. You have to have this conversation with mature people. And if you notice some of this stuff going on in your church, how about you don't tell Sister Sally, who like is not in the game, she doesn't serve, but she's got all the time in the world to hear you talk about the pastoral family. How about you just go to the pastor themselves? Go talk to them and say, hey, this is what I see. If you're scared of that, if you're afraid of that, I ask you to test it. Just try it out. If the conversation goes wrong, you have an answer.
Yeah.
But if the conversation comes good, then you'll get an explanation that'll satisfy. Oh, this makes sense. Or you'll be like, oh, they're not self-aware.
Yeah.
And so that's another answer. And so maybe you can help reform what's going on there. But we want you to continue this conversation. If you have no one to talk to us. The comment section is always open. We read every single thing. I know Tommy does. I do. We've had some comments that are so sideways that you and I have both responded to as well, because we're not afraid to live in detention and have the conversations in detention. You don't need to agree with us to have a conversation. We'd love to have it with you. Please leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to these podcasts, these episodes. And if you're on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us more than you know. Until next time. Peace.